Okay, welcome everyone to this week's installment of Let's Talk Horses. I've got a different background this week in case you hadn't noticed. It's funny when you're on the road and you're like, oh, wow, I didn't really think of my background for my podcast. So I've got like this lamp pointing on me so I can get a bit front lit and I'm like, oh, my background's. But there you go. I'm actually enjoying a couple of nights in California before I head south to El Lugar to see my horses there, to ride, to do access consciousness classes. I'm actually facilitating a conscious horse, conscious rider class there, but who cares? Because right now I get to welcome my very, very special friend, my special guest for this week, podcast returnee.
Yeah.
Hello, Becky. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for asking me to come back.
Oh, I love talking to you. We were just having the best conversation off air and I was like, okay, let's just hit record because these are the things that really everything we were talking about is what this podcast is all about. And the reason I love having such a variety of guests on is because we share something in common, which is horses, a love of horses, you know, this joy that they bring our lives, no matter in what way that shows up. But I also get for everyone, they are very different. And we were just talking off air a little bit about how different we are with our horses. And I'm sure you're starting to notice your relationship with horses, not just Fred, who is your, you know, your main squeeze, your main guy, but all of the horses that you interact with and the different relationships you get to form with them. So what would you like to start with? I mean, the last time we spoke, we covered some really cool stuff. Is there anything that's been going on in particular since we last caught up that you'd like to start with Fred or?
Oh, it's my favorite topic, Fred.
I know, right?
I know. Actually, yes. I there's something that I think that you don't. Well, you do hear a little bit about it. But you know, when you're on social media, and I'm always posting all these wonderful pictures, and you know, a lot of times when I've just been learning to jump, like cross rails, and I'm like, yay! And I'm posting pictures. But sometimes what you don't always see is like the really tough moments, you know, like the really like just those ones that you're like, wow, this has been a really tough day. And and for me, like the last probably week and a half has been tough. Now, tough is amazing, like things are coming great, but even just to be really vulnerable about it, you know, like everything's always great, but then, wow, I've had a really tough time, you know, like really tough time. And really with me, it was like battling my head, like, you know, like we've just said, like on social media, I've been jumping cross rails. So like, I'm really getting finally, you know, my strength and my balance and being comfortable in the saddle. And then, you know, you have like this lizard brain that's, you know, you have fear, you have worries. And it started off for me where I was just like, wow, everything kind of just showed up that I've been asking for. And I was like, wow. And I know that, you know, that sounds crazy. You know, I ask for all these things. I ask questions. I'm like, I'd love to jump. I'd love to be able to canter. I'd love to be doing these things. And then one day it just felt like, wow, everything just showed up that I've been asking for. And I got that I physically was able to do all these things. And then it was just really working on, you know, my mind and like that monkey brain and the fear. And so I you know, that's kind of what it started off as, where I was just recognizing that. And I think, you know, the first thing for everybody is like, if you have things come up, it's to go like, oh, wow, I'm actually having a hard time. And, you know, and
to
not
acknowledge it
myself.
in that moment.
Yeah.
And not brush over it and be like, you know, because a lot of the time I also talk about with horses, especially like if you are nervous or you're scared or there's something going on with you and you approach your horse like, I'm fine, I'm going to, you know, jump a meter today or whatever it is, your horse is also going to be looking at you like, dude, you don't feel fine. Like there is something that's not quite matching here. And this is where I think they're such great facilitators with this stuff. Because if you walked up and was like, hey, Fred, or whoever you were riding for that day, I'm in a little bit of a vulnerable position, in a vulnerable space here. And you don't need to verbally say it to your horse, although I talk to my horses all the time. I'm sure you do as
Mhm.
well. And I'm like,
Yeah.
dude, I'm feeling a bit strange today. Like, are you cool if we just like take it slow or whatever? Like, how much they're like, man, I got ya. Like, let's tackle this together. But I just
Yeah.
want to ask you one quick question. When you talk about this whatever that shows up for you, monkey mind, lizard brain, like something, how does it show up? Like, what is the feeling that your body goes through? Is it something before you ride where you've really got to talk yourself into like pulling your pants on and your boots on that day? Or when does it start showing up in your world? When
Well, when I first
Yeah.
started to notice it, it was like on the way to the barn for a lesson. Any other time, it was no big deal, but it was like
Yep.
on the way to a lesson. And I was like, ooh, like, my stomach, I'm nervous. And I'm like, what is this? What am I, like, what am I aware of? And, just started, really looking at what was happening and what I
Yep.
was, afraid of. When you ask, like, what am I afraid of? I would probably have to say, like, the worst case scenario of falling off and dying. Like,
Yep.
I don't want to fall off my horse,
Yep.
and I don't want to be hurt. And I think,
Yep.
that's a big thing. And if people are willing to even really look at it, I think it's a world in itself. Or
Yep.
how many people, are riding horses and they have like this whole reality of that. And, I know we're very aware, and I'm tapping into it,
Right.
you know? Yeah. Yeah. And really it was
Yep.
tapping into it. And so that's really kind of, the first thing that I really was aware of. And I was like, okay. And then, I also just gave myself a bit of a break. Like what you said, it was to my trainer. I was like, can we do something like easy today? I
Yep.
just like
Cool.
need to like, have some space. And she's always like, yeah, okay. Or, so like I talk through it. And then what ended up happening is, it was like last week, I believe. Well, maybe not last week, a couple weeks. I don't even know what the time is. Sorry. But I was on the lesson horse, Mr. Nova. And he's a 20-year-old horse. He's such a gentleman. He really takes care of you. And it's funny, right before that lesson, I was, looking at it, talking to myself. I always like to ask questions and, do different things before I ride. And I was like, oh, it's always so easy when I ride him because I trust him. He's so
Oh,
good. He's so easy to ride. So, and I was like, really looking at it, I was like, it's interesting why it's so much easier for me than when I ride Fred. And I didn't really, I never really came to a conclusion about it, but I was like, oh, it's so interesting how when I know I have a lesson with the lesson horse versus Fred, there, like, there's a difference. I'm like, do I have a point of view? Just so really asking myself questions. So we had a lesson with Mr. Nova. I get there and, I go to get on him, and we've had lots and lots of rain here in Florida. So our arena is flooded. So we're going to go out into the field and ride. And it's a massive field. It is fenced in, but it's a big field. And we were, practicing cantering, and I went one way and I nailed it, and we were doing really good. And I went another way to practice the other lead. And right when I asked him to go up, a car went by and went vroom. And right when I was in the canter hitting it, he took off. He spooked, just took off. And here, we're talking about, having fear and, controlling your fear. And um, there was I remember my trainer being like, come on, get him back, circle him, whatever. And there was a moment where I got up and I was able to be like, hey. And in that moment, I think if I would have done a one rein stop, which I'm not sure what everyone else is, you grab one rein and pull it and get his head to turn, I probably could have had him right there. And it's funny when we're also talking about this, you learn these tools. I've learned one rein stop, circle them, all these things. And I also learn like an emergency dismount. These are things my trainer, we've went over many times in case, something does happen because you're on a horse. And
yeah.
so he bolted. I didn't do one at that moment, a one rein stop. And I just felt him in his head go home. He's like, I'm not stopping. And
Yep.
he grabbed onto the bit like held it and put his head down, and he galloped. And there was another point where I kind of got up once again and balanced up. I was in my seat and I was like, hey, you know, and he was like a freight train. He was not stopping. So at that point, you know, I'm a beginner, maybe not anymore after that. I've never galloped before. And not only galloping, it really, like, I felt like I was on a, like,
different when you're out of control.
He was completely gone. I literally, you know, I think at that point he's like, I'm already in trouble. He's going back to the barn. And so about 3 minutes we're galloping. At this point, I just grab his mane and I, you know, kind of get into a 2 point, and I'm like, I'm not falling off, you know. And I was not afraid in those moments. I remember just, you know, what can I do? What's next? I'm on him. And as you know, it was a pretty good amount of time we were galloping, and I had my seat so well. And then we're coming up to the gate and then the barns over there. Well, in this area, there's a bunch of sand. And I'm like, I'm getting off him because I didn't have him back. Like I don't know, he wasn't coming back. Like he wasn't stopping, you know, he could have went through you know, there's all these different things, but I knew what would work for me in that moment. And I was like, I'm getting off in this big sand here. Like it was big. And so, you know, I did my emergency dismount, which is like you kind of swing, you know, your other foot over. And my one foot did get caught in the stirrup a bit, but I just pushed off and I tuck and rolled. And I'll tell you, everyone was like, that's probably the best emergency dismount. I was like, ugh. And he actually did go through the gate. He took off and ran into the barn. Like they couldn't get him. He just, you know, he was gone. And I mean, mentally even, you know, he just was like, this is what's happening. He's excited and overstimulated. And so after, you know, that whole experience, I actually phoned a friend because I didn't want to lock all that in. You know, I was like, hey, can I tell you what happened? Can I ask you a couple of questions? And my friend was like, oh, so it just sounds like maybe your horse was out of control, but you were in control the whole time. And I was like, wow, I was. Yep. So what ended up, like, that experience, what happened for me was that I was like, I can handle this. Yeah. Right. Like if my horse does something, you know, you practice what you can do. Sometimes some things work. And, you know, everyone's like, you should have got him in a circle. Well, yeah. Well, guess what? After he went, there was like, I don't get that, you know, really would have worked at the moment when we were already gone. In the beginning, it definitely would have. So there's a lot of things now I know, well, in the beginning, I could have done this or, you know, as an afterthought. But I also was, you know, I got off him. Of course, I went to the chiropractor the next day. My neck was a little bit out, but like I felt fantastic. My body was like, we got this. We tuck and rolled. And I was like, you know what? Like I can handle anything. Like when you do have, you know, fear and people teach you all these different things, like a lot of times that just kind of goes out the door. Like when you're in the moment, it's really like increments of time, 10-second increments. You're like, okay, this is what's next. And I remember like each one at one point I was like, oh, I'm galloping. And the other point I was like, I'm going to die. We're going to hit a tree, you know? So I remember all these little things, you know, just happening. But what I really did acknowledge, and that I think out of that whole situation it created for me was, I was like, wow, I do have my back. I can handle this. This is the worst case scenario. Like to have your horse go, you know, running across like this massive field, galloping out of control. And I stayed on, you know, I was very balanced and I made a good choice at the end. And so, you know, conquering your fear, but actually in that moment, I didn't really have any fear. Yeah. It's like what I really was looking at, it's like fear and worry really happen in like in the past and in the future. If you're present, you're able to actually handle any situation.
That is so cool because really, and I'd love to look at now since this incident happened, because there's so much in that as well. But let me just park that for a moment and look at, because you're so correct. Fear doesn't exist in the moment. Fear exists as a pretense to something or like a post
and how I
something.
lock it in, or I don't even
Yeah.
mean lock it in, but like you can have someone go, "Oh, you almost died," and then people talking to you afterward. I'm like, "Oh yeah," or
Yeah.
and then you kind of take all that in. Where
Yeah, whereas in the moment you knew, like, I love how you were talking about, "Oh, my seat, I'm, like, sitting so good in this gallop and my seat," and then I was in my 2 point and I was really good at like, really there was no point where and, Fred was being a horse. I mean, sorry, not
yeah,
Fred,
Nova,
Mr. Nova was being a
yeah,
horse. He like, "I need to survive right now. I'm going back to my friends and where I know
yes,
I'm safe in my stall." Like, he was
I'm out
being
of here.
him, you were being you. Like, there's nothing there that should at all compromise the amazing relationship you had. So after an incident like that, then when those feelings come up in your body, sometimes when then it's almost like uncontrollable. You're like going there again, you're putting your pants on and your boots on, you're getting in the car, and then your stomach goes and your heart rate increases a little bit. So have you got some tools now that you're playing with that you get to explore with this so-called fear that starts to come up after an incident like this happens?
Well, actually, yeah, and I actually got right back on him once we got him
Cool.
from the barn.
Cool.
So just so you have that piece too, I got right back on him, and we went into the rink, and it's half of it. We just rode around a little bit and even trotted a bit just to, get back on and
And so
do that.
even in that little bit of information, so was there anywhere, because I know a lot of people as well, after a horse has done something like that, people feel it necessary to punish the horse, or now you need to show him that he
Uh,
can't get away with that, or blah, 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 blah. But what was that part of the experience like for you, like with like reconnecting
well,
with him in that way?
actually, like there was no punishment for him.
Yeah.
Like there was like we didn't yell at him or anything. Like I don't even think he would know. But what it was is that the idea of it getting right back on, it was like, hey, like that's not going to work. To
Yep.
get your own way and get me off, because now we're going right back to work.
Cool. Yep.
So, it really was for both of us, for
Yeah.
me to just kind of be like, you got to get back on. And I had to get back on. So he knew like that's not acceptable.
Cool.
And that was the punishment,
Yeah.
like that was, he got scared. He reacted. Now he knew a few times that I was asking him to stop. And,
Yeah.
he did choose to keep going. But there was no punishment. It was like, this is what we're going right back to work
Cool.
for that. And honestly, the craziest thing that I found is by processing it step by step like that. And really, gosh, what tools did I use? Well, one, I called my friend that's a facilitator, and he asked me, right after this happened,
Yeah.
and he asked me, lots of questions. And that really helped me dissipate the emotions. Because I think really what
Yep.
happens too a lot of times is the emotions that you kind of lock in of like, I was mad at Nova, like, and then I'm like, was this person, like I was trying to make it personal, like he hates me. Why would he do that to me? He hates
Oh.
me, and really just being aware of like what I was feeling as well. And, because it's really, um, it wasn't personal. And instead of going into, which I already was before this, which I said in the beginning, I was really having a hard time, like with fear and like kind of catching up to everything I was doing. And then this took place. But this actually showed me is, well, hey, I was asking for courage. I was asking for courage and confidence. And then in this weird, interesting way, the universe was like, here you go. You
Yep.
are courage. You do have
Yep.
courage and you are confident. And that's
Yep.
what's actually showed up, which I know, kind of sounds the opposite, but you'd think of an emergency kind of, situation. But that is actually what showed up, because that's what I really looked at. What I got out of what took place is like, wow, I actually can handle this. I'm a better writer now than what I give myself credit. And I knew what to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And how much too, because when you were first telling the beginning of the story, when you when you approached your lesson that day with Mr. Nova and you were talking about, oh, it's kind of in the easy pile because I know him. I feel less anxious when I ride him than I do with Fred. Like, he's the schoolmaster horse, he's this. But somewhere, like if you've been asking, and this is what I love about horses as well, if you've been asking to show up and be a better rider, step into being a better rider, step into be more courageous in your riding and the sport that you're endeavoring into with your horses, that he actually, you said you trusted him, and it's so cool how you can trust him to show that to you in a way where it was like, even though at times you felt unsafe, but there was not a time where, he could have run through a fence with you, he could have hit a tree with you. Like there's so many of these situations, but when you look at it overall, this horse really gave you exactly kind of in a way the things that you've been asking for, and it's such a gift. Yeah, and in Access we say this thing also, that it never shows up the way you think it's going to, and I think horses are also such magnificent facilitators in that sort of stuff as well, because you go to your horse to have all of these different things. Well, actually, a lot of the time I find the stuff that my horse shows me, I'm never even expecting my horse to show me. Like if I want to improve some area of my life, but it's nothing to do with riding or horses, but then I get around my horse and that thing, like whether it's like, I feel like I'm judging people a lot at the moment, or I'm judging myself. I'd like to start looking at that. And then I get around my horses, and then all of a sudden I see how they are with each other. And it starts to change that part of my world as well. And I'm like, there's just really nothing that I can think of that they're not willing to facilitate us on.
Yeah, exactly. And where I was like, really, I got out of that whole experience too, is I was like, really to be vulnerable with myself, like, and have trust, right? Like I'm like, hey, I do trust me. Cool. I do have my own back. Like, I'm not sure where I gave that up, but I think a lot of times where you come into something new, you're like, I have no idea what I'm doing, so I'm a newbie. I'm nobody. Like, you have all this experience, like I don't have that. And so somewhere, I kind of gave up my trust, and I was like, wow, I do trust me. Like, I do trust that in the moment I will know what to do. Now, everyone's like, you should have done a one rein stop. And then I was like, I should have, and I was overthinking it a little bit. And then I was like, but if I wouldn't have been able to gallop for the first time.
Like, exactly. And practice your dismount and practice your seat. Like there were so many things that you got out of this. Yeah.
Yeah. And I trust the horse to be a horse.
Exactly. Yeah.
I was like, I trust him. Yeah, I do trust him, but I do have to trust him also to be a horse. And what like 100%. Horses do, he's got his own back.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah. Yeah. And he did his best to take care of you. I mean, if in his mind he's like, we are going to die if I stop here. That loud noise was definitely a dragon. It's flying after us right now. It's blowing.
I'm going to save us.
Fire and flames everywhere. I'm taking us back to the barn where we're going to be safe. He's like, well, he actually did a really good job of that.
He's like, you'll thank me later. You'll thank me later.
Yeah. Yeah. I did want to quickly highlight this as well, where you said the phone a friend thing. I think this is something like to have in our back pocket, in our arsenal, in our toolkit, whatever, at all times as well, to have those one or two people, or as many as you can, but at least one person that you can call and say, hey, can you help me with this? Can you ask me a few questions about this? And someone that's not going to go into the trauma, the drama, the upset, the resistance, the reaction, that are just going to be like, hey, here's some questions that are just going to help you not, like you said, lock all of this in and create something with it. I think that is also such an important part of this story as well, that having friends like that is so crucial to us in our journey with horses, but also just in life, in consciousness, in living, in everything. So
definitely. And really the piece of, like, do you trust you? Or do you trust your knowing? Do you trust that in any situation, whether you're on a horse or whatever it is, that in that moment you're actually going to know what to do, what's going to work, in scuba diving, I did a night dive scuba diving, and I had another, like, one of those epic moments, because, in scuba diving too, they teach you everything worst case scenario, how to survive if this happens, like how to survive if this happens, do this. And I did a night dive, and it was my first one. And it's very interesting because all your senses now are gone. Like you can't see, well, you can never really hear. Like your friend cannot be like, hey, are you okay underwater? You know, you have to rely on hand signals, and it's dark. And so I had this really strong, like pivotal moment where my mind, I felt like I was alone in a dark box with my mind and all of my fears. And I was like, well, I, have a couple options here. I can trust me. I can trust that if there's an emergency that I am going to know what to do, and it will be the right thing in that moment for me. Because I was kind of panicking a bit. And when you're like, what should I do? What should I do? And you can't remember anything anyways. In the moment, you're like, what the hell did they tell me? Like, gosh, I wish I would have paid more attention. Like, what did they say to do in this situation? Or what can I do now? And like, so I was like, you know what? I really, really have to trust me, and I have to thrive. I made the demand where I was just like, you know what? I am, and it's with Nova and the horses, and I'm going to trust me. I'm going to trust that I know what to do, and I'm going to thrive and be present in every moment. And make it count. And because, even in life, when we're little, how much are we taught every worst case scenario? Well, be careful, don't do this because this and this will happen. Well, be careful, don't do this because such and such is going to happen. And we live our lives from, how to survive the worst case scenario.
Yep.
That's horrible.
Yeah. We're taught survival rather than thrival. Totally.
And back to where we started in this whole conversation of fear. Well, where is this fear coming from? Well, my made up worst case possibility realities that I'm living. And none of it's real.
Yeah. And how often, like from a very young age as well, we draw together so closely. The moment there's anxiousness in our world, it shows up then as this very particular feeling in your body. And most of us have that, right? I was talking to my sister about this, where she's like, I've been so anxious lately with her job. She was stressed at her job. And I'm like, yeah, but what is that anxious feeling? And she's like, that thing in your stomach. I'm like, when did you first feel that? And she was like, oh, I'd never even thought of that. And she like retracted back through our childhood, and she named this time where she's like, that was the first time I ever felt that feeling in my body. And I'm like, so, because I'm like on this journey as well of exploring, like, especially how it shows up physically for us too. And I'm like, so I wonder if like every time the energy's there of whatever that is, that our body just has this like go-to thing that, because it remembers from where we've tried to survive so much through our childhoods, or like we've been told to survive in this way. And I'm like, what if even in that moment we were willing to sit with it and be like, oh, okay, so the energy's there, it's showing up like this in my body, and then you get to like give it some space and pull it apart a little bit and ask some questions and just look at like, what's actually true for me in this situation? What's really going on?
What's really going on? And I actually was driving today and having this conversation. One of my friends is reading, oh gosh, it's the Distractor Implant book, which is
Living Beyond Distraction.
Yes, Living Beyond Distraction, which is such an amazing book. And in this book club, he was like, well, really, these things aren't real. That's why I said it's like you're living in a different, you're not present. You're living in a past of maybe something that took place and you worried about, like you said, when you were little and it showed up this way, or worse, like what we were then talking about of like worst case scenario of accidents or something that could happen that you're always preparing for in the future. So they're really not real. And so one of the tools then that I was using today when I was driving, and I was like, okay, let me play with that. Like whether you're like, what do you mean my fear is really real? So I'm not, dishonoring anybody, but what I love to sit and play with, I was like, what if it isn't real? So what would my rights be like if I didn't have fear or worry? If I didn't create that reality of like, this is going to happen, or this is going to show up somewhere at some time, this. And I was like, well, I looked at it and just, put myself in the arena riding, with Fred, and I was like, oh, play and fun. Like I did, that would be able to show up more. If, if I didn't have these other already predictive things that then I'm creating take place. So I wonder if, let's say we have this magic wand and we uncreate and destroy them and they aren't real. Like what could actually possibly show up now? Like how often do we wake up and, go like, I wonder what is the best case scenario today?
Yeah.
What is the best case scenario for my life? Like, like I wonder, what, like amazing can take place today. And it's so interesting that we, we're not raised that way. At least I wasn't. We're not raised that way, but we are. You better be careful. And so I would love, even after having my experience with this too, of like, wow, what if they're not real? And now what could actually show up?
Yep. And I so love what you've said, weaved through this podcast as well, because you've talked a lot about in the moment. And, you talked just then about joy and play and fun, but also I think the more present you are in the moment, I think there's this really old Chinese proverb thing where it says, people in the past, people that live in the past are depressed and people that live in the future are anxious, or something like that, where
I did
but when
see
you're
that.
present in the moment, none of that, because you're right here, right now. And I think with writing, and also what you said, there was something you said about what if after every situation or every moment I was present with and I always got better. It's almost like when you don't function from the, what's the worst case? What could go wrong here because it's happened before or whatever. It's like if I was present in this moment and I was always striving to have and be more of me, it's almost like that magic wand does get waved and the fear and the doubt and the insecurity, it's almost like it can't exist. Like they're completely mutually exclusive of each other when you're willing to have that level of presence in the moment, because it's something else we're not taught. And I think it's because we are taught to be so careful and don't, screw this up. Don't make a mistake. Don't hurt yourself. Don't hurt other people. It's like you're so worried about everything else. But if you were just willing to be super present in the moment, none of that would happen. And if it did, you would know what to do in that moment. Exactly as you said, you could completely trust yourself.
And you trust yourself to have your own back and, and know what you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
how much more relaxation is in that too? Like just to feel that in your body, the difference between that and yeah. Wow. Thank you so much. What a cool conversation. And I think it kind of went nowhere where we thought it would go, kind of did, but then it was also like this really. So thank you so much. I think that's an awesome place to wrap it up on.
It's like, I always want to be like, yes, I'm having a blast. Yes, you see these amazing things that I'm doing. But I also have tough times too. And then when I do have those tough times, come back and listen to this. And there's some tools that you can, you can use, and you're never alone. And, there's somebody out there that, that's been doing what you're doing and, can use some tools and ask some questions. And so if anybody, out there even gets something out of this conversation,
I'm sure they'll get a lot of somethings. And it's also like this thing where, for me, like I call it, the meandering path to consciousness. And consciousness is everything, right? Like it's everything that we encounter in our lives. And my version of consciousness is mine because I'm on my path. But there just so happens that there's so many people out there on this same path. We're all going in our own directions based on our choices and based on the things. But it's actually like we're so connected with each other. And that's why a lot of the time we end up picking up on each other's fears and all this other stuff. So what if now, like, and coming away from this podcast, exactly like you said, those moments when you feel the most alone, what if that was the times that you were actually the most free and willing to be connected to absolutely everyone and everything? And also being willing to allow your horses to contribute to you in that way as well.
Yeah. I'll have that.
Yeah. Me too. Being part of the herd, the consciousness herd. Thank you so much, Becky. Thank you
Thank
for being on here again. Thank you for being in this world. Thank you for being a fellow horse person. And I love watching your journey, and I can't wait to see what you choose next. And I think you've just at the beginning of an amazing adventure, my friend. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you for watching, everyone. See you next time.